First of all, how much pressure was Sidney Mufamadi under before that briefing started?
That's probably a question he's best placed to answer himself, because it's mostly pressure that people put on themselves to want to have their version of the story out there. I think in any kind of documentary film there are going to be issues around how a story is being told. And often those stories are told that in ways that make some people uncomfortable, and it of course is open to contestation. But the nature of living in a democratic society is that you have contestation, that you have differences of views, and that if he feels that he was maligned, then certainly he should go the route that Thandeka Kabule is going, which is to approach the courts. But my sense is that this was much more about control over the narrative in South Africa, the story that we tell about our past, our recent past, our history, and how we got to be here.
It still doesn't answer the question, though, as to why the probe was reopened in the first place. He says he was aware of the investigation. He didn't interfere. Again, he references the former leader of the Democratic Party, Tony Leon, asking for the reopening of the case. What was the intention, though?
Well, of the reopening of the issue, that is not entirely clear. My sense is that, according to the record, George Fiver says that Tony Leon brought the Sepe family to him to say this must be reopened. An investigation was done to check whether there...
But he would have been looking for political mileage at the time, obviously.
Tony Leon, who knows? He is best placed to answer that question himself. It may have been that the Sepe family felt that they weren't getting answers from the official spaces, and so another senior leader or senior politician in the South African landscape would have been approached for that reason. Again, the Sepes could answer that question, why they approached Tony Leon. Tony Leon could answer the question for why he proceeded to do this. But I think it still remains with the then Minister of Safety and Security to answer how that process happened, because many people every day in South Africa call for investigations of issues and don't get those investigations instituted, and certainly don't get the kind of budget that we knew this investigation had. So the bureaucratic process can very easily be unearthed by going back to 1995 records, asking who made the decision, who supported it, and that is not something that Mr. Mufamadi can do off the cuff and in a media briefing. That would have to go back into the union buildings, go into Hansard, go into cabinet minutes and cabinet meeting discussions, and see how that decision was made.
Angelo, within the current political climate that we're operating in right now, could you try and explain to us, if you can, why these revelations contained in the documentary, and then also the refuting of some of those allegations by Mufamadi today, have value, and why it is important at this particular juncture?
I think the death of Winnie Madikizela Mandela has allowed all sorts of South Africans to ask critical questions about what they've made of her in her lifetime. And many of us who've been researching the life of and times of Winnie Madikizela Mandela have had concerns in various pockets of that life. So some people have been concerned with the actual historical record, others have been concerned with her treatment, people like me are concerned with the representations in the public media of Winnie Madikizela Mandela. And this is because in that mosaic of the life of Winnie Madikizela Mandela there are all these components, and no one person or no one group of people can give you the full picture. That's not how research works. And what I think this moment has allowed is for all sorts of South Africans to ask, how did we come to this appreciation, which we're now being asked to revise? And in doing so, we're revisiting a whole series of issues from our past, which is how apartheid media and mediation of information worked in the late paranoid phase up until about 1992-93. And we see this when people were marking the anniversary, the 25th anniversary of the assassination of Chris Hani as well. Then we're looking at the early post-apartheid period, 1994 up to the TRC. And in today's moment, we're still working with young people who, in the wake of the 2015 student uprisings, are asking questions about the story of the recent past that they've inherited and how valid and valuable that is moving into the future.
Are we learning anything more about that time? Again, Mufamadi saying there were statements that were put out to create chaos within the ANC. They wanted us to fight among ourselves. But for those of us who are old enough to remember, that was virtually common cause at the time, or at least it was alluded to.
And that's one component of the story of the past. So no one can deny that there would have been attempts by the apartheid state, and there's much evidence in this regard, to destabilize the ANC ahead of its first election, ahead of the first democratic elections. That's not deniable, that's fairly clear on the record. But what isn't yet clear for many South Africans is the role that the ANC played in the way in which Winnie Madikizela Mandela was treated in that period. So there is the resignation of the Women's League members at a later point in the ANC's own history. There are the statements that Mufamadi refers to today by the Mass Democratic Movement, and he today contextualized how that statement got to be made by Murphy Morobe in 1989. Now, that's one component, but South Africa as a whole is not just the political parties, Stratcom, the National Party. There are also all sorts of other organizations and individuals. The media played one role. And the simplification of good media and bad media is not helpful because that's not borne out by the historical record. Stratcom was certainly one component of destabilizing the media. But we must all begin to think of how the representations of Winnie Madikizela Mandela, even in the left-wing media of the time, the media critical of the apartheid government, the media vaguely supportive of the ANC at the time, had very, very deeply misogynistic ideas about Winnie Madikizela Mandela. That was in late apartheid South Africa. Those tropes repeat themselves in post-apartheid South Africa when you look at media coverage of the TRC. So it's not just a matter of have we got the players in place. It's also looking back at what does the actual text reveal, what do the cartoons show us, what do the images show us, and what do the stories tell.